Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hi, Rosemary. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Now, I've got a curiosity here. Actually, you need to tell me whether that's the case. I've done some research before in preparation for this interview, and I found out that in addition to being a coach, a mentor, a speaker, you've actually done some real stand-up comedy. Is that true?
I certainly have. It's very, very, very true. Yeah.
Wow. I find this fascinating because I think that stand-up comedians are the best public speakers. There's nothing close to what they're able to do. And just tell me a little bit more about the experience. How did you get to doing that? How was it? Is there something that you still do? What's your experience when it comes to stand-up comedy?
Yeah. So yeah, happy to share. So I don't know. I've always been a writer. Whether it's actually it was more for myself. And I always wrote little kind of funny sketches, and I was like, they make me chuckle, but I'm not sure if they would make anyone else chuckle. But my friends and family, they all think I'm very funny, just naturally funny without performing. So I had this kind of bucket list, let's call it, loosely speaking, and I wanted to let me try my hand at a comedy course, which is what I did. So I did a comedy course, and I think it was 6 weeks or 8 weeks to begin with. And at the end of it, we had to do a program. We had to do a show in a comedy club in Soho. So I was absolutely petrified because, you know, it's one thing doing it with your colleagues and not your colleagues, your classmates, but to actually go out and try and make people in a comedy situation laugh. So, but I did it. And for me, when I got that very first laugh, I was like, okay, it was like this kind of relief, this weight lifted off my shoulder. So I just carried on, and I did a sketch of filled with laughter, and I really enjoyed it. I don't do it now. I haven't done anything recently, but I still want to continue doing it. I still would like to do some more.
Have you noticed any either improvements, or has that helped you as a speaker, because you also speak in public, you give presentations? Was that useful to you?
I don't think, maybe behind the scenes it was helpful to get around nerves, that first initial performing in front of a big crowd. But I think my personality is such that I'm not really fearful of standing up in front of people. I don't really overthink it. But in terms of public speaking, I think when I started speaking in public seriously, it was a whole different ball game in how you deliver your pitch, your tone, etc. It was quite different from comedy, but maybe mentally it helped. I had never really thought about that before, so that's a good question.
Yeah. And I want to focus our conversation today on one of your areas of expertise, emotional intelligence, confidence, and how that relates to either public speaking or let's say communication in general.
Yeah.
And first of all, what are we talking about? What is emotional intelligence?
So emotional intelligence is it's the capacity to be aware of, to manage and control your emotions, for the benefit of yourself and for the benefit of others. So it's not just, what's in it for me, how do I control my emotions so that I'm the only benefactor, but how do I control my emotions in a more public setting? So maybe with your work colleagues, in your business, when you're speaking in public, how do you read or gauge the people you're speaking to? You can look around the room, you can see that some people might have their eyes closed, some people might be tapping their feet, because they're kind of either thinking or they're pacing or you're boring them. There could be so many different things to look at, but you use your emotions or emotional information to really gauge what's going on around you, and you use it to communicate. So you use every element of your kind of emotions, what you sense, what you see, to converse and communicate with others. So that's the basis of emotional intelligence, how you manage and control your emotions.
And how do you do that? How do you develop their skill? Because we are saying, okay, you need to be able to control and be aware, as you said, of your emotions. I know that maybe it's too much of a broad question, and please just stop me if that's the case. But at least what are the first steps if somebody wants to develop their emotional intelligence? What would you say? What could be and what should be the first steps in doing that?
So, well, the first thing you've used the phrase in what you said is that you've got to want to do it, because it's for me, developing your emotional intelligence takes time and it takes commitment. So if you're kind of half-hearted about it, I don't think it will really work. You know, some people are natural at being aware of their own emotional intelligence. Some people just it just flows easily. But if it's something that's new to you, how do you take the first step? So the first thing is, you've got to want to do it. And the second thing, I mean, I'll talk about the elements individually, but there's some key elements around emotional intelligence. And the first thing is to be aware. So self-aware. How are you interacting with other people? How do your emotions affect how you interact with other people? When you're speaking to someone, having a conversation with someone, if you're having a bad day, how does that come out of you? How are you able to either kind of notice it and then put it to one side, or do you bring that into the conversation so that it affects the conversation and probably in a negative way? You know, obviously you can feel great emotions, and that's always going to affect a conversation differently than when you bring a kind of a negative spin to a conversation. So the first step is being about self-awareness. And then once you start becoming aware, I mean, that takes some time. Like, do people gravitate towards you, or do they see you coming and go in the opposite direction? So you have to be quite honest with yourself as well, because a lot of people don't want to know that, well, actually, I'm not really a particularly good person to be around when I'm not in a good mood. Nobody really wants to admit that, but you have to be very honest. So self-awareness and honesty, that's the first step. And I can cover some more of the individual elements.
Yeah, please, because you mentioned the elements of emotional intelligence. So how many elements, what are these elements?
Yeah, so there's 5 elements.
Right.
This comes from a book by Daniel Goleman, where the 5 elements are self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. So if I talk about each one of those individually and make them relatable. So first of all, I just spoke about the self-awareness. But once you will become aware of your emotions, what do you then do? How are you able to regulate those emotions? So when you're aware that you're in a bad mood, you're quite grouchy, or, you know, you're not feeling great, how do you then regulate that? And I'm not talking about that you cut off feeling anything. I'm not talking about you suddenly not become angry, but you become aware that you are angry or upset or frustrated, pissed off, whatever you want to call it. And then instead of bringing that into a conversation or bringing that into a situation, you regulate that. You say to yourself, well, I want to get the best out of this conversation. I want to be able to speak to someone and that we both get something out of this situation. So how do I regulate that rather than bringing it into the conversation? The third piece is around motivation. So I always think that emotional intelligence is about getting the best out of yourself and the best out of others. So it's not a selfish thing, it's a sharing thing. So motivation. So people who have a high degree of emotional intelligence are able to self-motivate. So they are able to kind of defer immediate gratification for more of a long-term goal. So rather than, if you've got something to write, like a thesis or a report, oh, I'm going to watch Netflix. That's not the thing that comes up. You're more focused on the long-term goal, which is to write the thesis or to write the report. So your motivation. And then when people are around you, they're engaged, they love you, they love your energy, they love what you say, how you communicate. So you therefore help and motivate others, which is always great if you're speaking and presenting, or you're a leader and you have a team. Yeah, it's so very, very important to be able to motivate your team without shouting at them and telling them, what do they call it, the carrot and the stick. You know, they naturally want to be around you because you effuse that energy that people want to really be on your side, or really want to bring the best out of themselves. The third piece is empathy. So, the fourth piece is empathy. So you are more likely to empathize with others. So rather than saying, I wanted that report done and you haven't done it, what's wrong with you? You're more likely to have that conversation. So, what's going on? You didn't finish that today. Is there something I can help you with? So you're more likely to empathize. It doesn't mean that you empathize so much nothing gets done. You empathize and you put yourself in someone else's shoes. And that really does bring people kind of on side as well. And is another factor for motivation. And the last piece is about your social skills. How do you interact? How do you communicate? How do you, again, bring people along with you so that you all get the win-win situation? You all benefit from a situation or a circumstance. So those are the kind of 5 elements. And you can obviously phrase them or use them in any way that you can do. But if you have them all together, they really make for building fantastic relationships and getting the best out of people.
Super powerful. And you mentioned before, Rosemary, that it takes time. So if somebody comes to you and they say, he or she says, look, I want to work on my emotional intelligence, I want to master this set of skills, what's the typical time frame? What are we talking about? Is that something that can be developed in a few days, in a few weeks, in a few months, in a few years? What is it?
Great question. The impatience of everyone in the world. Can you do it now? Can it be done now? So that depends. It depends on the type of person in front of me. So I would never, I wouldn't even hazard a guess on how long it would take. I think it's a life skill. I think it developed. I'm still working on mine, and I would say I've got really high level of emotional intelligence. But because if someone comes and they're vaguely aware of their own emotions and their own behaviors already, then that's kind of not halfway there, but you're already on that start. If someone comes along and says, well, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm perfect, then there's a lot more work going on behind the scenes. So, just even starting that journey, you can make a difference in 6 weeks, but I would say it can really take a long time, a matter of years to really, really nail it. And also you slip. You slip. No one's perfect. So even when you think you've got your emotional intelligence down pat and something happens, can impact you as well. So it's not something that is, you learn and that's it. It's something that you have to work on. And I have to work on. I know all the basics. I practice it all the time, but I still sometimes my buttons get pushed and I'm like, woo! I've got to really hang on to that. So,
I think it's like in my area, it's like public speaking. It's not. It's something that you always need to get better at if you want to. It's not something, okay, I've done it, I've nailed it, I'm perfect at giving presentations, speaking in public. That there's always room for improvement, and I understand it's similar in this area. And before you mentioned, I think it was the third element, motivation, right?
Yeah.
Now you also say, and I've read some of your pieces online, some of your articles, that motivation, the success is an inside job. And so it's this idea of internal versus external motivation. So could you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So in my experience, for myself and the people around me, people I've worked with, my friends and family, what I've seen is that when something is generated internally, so it's a want or a wish that's internal, generally it's more it's more genuine. It's more affected to you. When you are looking externally for success, promotion, rewards, monetary gain, you might be motivated for a short time, but then you get the money and then it kind of falls a bit flat. So for me, what I found is that when it's internal, when it's something that is kind of heart-centered, and I'm a bit around that. I'm about believing in myself first before I take it outside of the room, so to speak. When it's internal and it's really passionate to you, you're more likely to maintain that motivation and even when things are not going well, you've had a few setbacks, you're more likely to stick at something when it's internal. Or when it's something internal for you and the motivation is there for you, you're more likely to stick at something. Sometimes you might need a little bit of a boost, but for me, it's about it's being true to yourself, because it's so easy to follow what everybody else is doing, what your parents have told you, maybe a teacher has told you. It's someone else's goal, so that's external to you as well. So for me, it's really about finding what you want, what makes you tick, and then sticking at that to help you guide your motivation. It's about finding your own why, so to speak.
Yeah. And I don't know, this is something I read, for me, was a great book, maybe 10 years ago or something. I don't know whether you know it or whether you find it, because you are an expert in this field, I'm not, but I enjoyed it very much, from Daniel Pink, Drive. I don't know if you know that book.
I haven't read it, no, but I've heard it. Is it Daniel? Yeah, I haven't. I've heard of it, but I haven't read it. No.
Drive. I think the subtitle is "The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us," and it's this idea of internal versus external motivation. Yeah, I read it 10 years ago or something, and I found it very useful, very interesting.
So many amazing books out there, and it's hard to. Well, as you can see behind me, lots of them are travel books, but I've got a shelf there with personal development books as well, and just my fiction's gone out the window these days.
Yeah. And also, Rosemarie, another thing I wanted to ask you is that, so as I understand, this is not something that, when it comes to emotional intelligence and also the key elements that you've mentioned, motivation and empathy and being able to create positive relationships, communicate effectively, this is not something that you are born with. It's something that you can develop. And again, could you explore that a bit for us? Because there's always this idea of nature versus nurture, right?
Yeah.
So especially when it comes to emotional intelligence. So even if I understand that it's something that can be developed, but what do you think? Is it also something that maybe some people are more naturally inclined towards, or is it something that totally can be mastered by anybody?
That's again another great question. So as with any skill, we are born with the ability to develop. And for me with emotional intelligence, I was obviously born with the ability to develop it, but from an early age I was very much aware of talking to people, helping people, guiding. And I don't know where that came from. If I another lifetime, if I told you about my background, it doesn't match. It doesn't seem to match. But somehow I have that, and I've just had that ability to tune into other people. I've always wanted to help and guide my friends, family. Even when I had my own struggles when I was younger, I was always someone like the go-to person that could help and be objective around other people. So in talking about nature versus nurture, I think we're all born with the capacity and with an interest, or some people don't even know what emotional intelligence is, which is fine, and they'll go through their whole lives not really knowing what that term means, and they may have it within them. They might be practicing it every day, but they just don't know what the terminology is called. And some people are just not interested in wanting to communicate better and have better relationships. Strangely enough, there are people out there that don't want that or don't focus on that. So I definitely think it's a skill that can be developed. And the more interest that you have in it and the more time you take to spend on it will obviously support you in developing it and growing with it as well. And also I think looking at how it benefits you, like if you were to have a before and after of someone who's not developed their emotional intelligence and then after, and see that their relationships, their communication, the stress in their lives, everything is kind of, and some things are amplified and some things are reduced, the negatives reduced and the wonderful is amplified, then people would start to kind of embrace it more and think, well, yeah, I really like this. It's hard work, but I'll still go for it. So there's definitely something around, I like the nature versus nurture aspect.
And because you've just mentioned benefit, is there anything else, any other like practical benefits that come to your mind? You mentioned relationships and communication. Anything else?
Yeah. So, obviously better relationships, communication, and good communication naturally gives you better relationships anyway. So for me, because it's about managing your emotions as well, you, rather than being stressed and tense all the time, you'll find that that kind of removes it. Well, completely, that'd be nice, completely stress-free. It dissipates, it lessens. So when you're more aware of your situations, you know, where they say you can't control what's happening around you, but you can control how you react to it. So that's exactly what is about emotional intelligence. So, you know, the train is delayed. You can stand on the platform and rant and rave. It's not going to make the train get there any quicker. It's up to you. How you're going to read your book, listen to your podcast, chill out, and just carry on with your day. That is much better. Less stress, easily. Who doesn't want that? Especially, well, I live in London. I don't know where you are, but you know, I live in London, right? Those crazy packed trains that we used to get on in the morning, you know. And I remember I used to, when I was still working in the corporate world, I literally used to be on a train and, you know, your face is kind of squashed up against the, and I was like, well, I'm sitting there, I've got my music on and I'm kind of tapping, like squash tapping. But that helped me get to my day job in a much better frame of mind than being really grouchy. But it really takes hard work to get to that kind of almost Zen, that kind of, you know, chilled out position. So so that's some of the natural benefits.
Yeah, and this is so interesting to me also in my own personal life, and so useful, this idea of really being able to not being affected so much by what happens to us, but what matters is what you think about and how you react to what happens to us. How do you, and again, I don't know if the question is too broad, but how can you help others? Like, for example, and again, I have no problem in saying it's something that if it's very personal, maybe people close to me, if you've got somebody who is very close to you and you see that for that person is a bit more difficult to have that perspective, how would you go about making it easier for that person to have that, to understand that concept and to practice it in real life?
Yeah. So I always work on the premise that in terms of whoever's around me is, you know, are you enjoying yourself? You know, when that happens to you or you behave in that way, how does that make you feel? And the most part, nobody wants to be in a bad mood. Nobody wants to have stress. Nobody wants to feel terrible. So the first thing is to start. It's a very simple exercise. It's a really strange one. Well, I think it could be deemed a strain, is to observe yourself. Literally have that kind of, you're almost disconnecting from yourself and watch yourself and your behavior on a daily basis. So observe when you're angry, observe when you're happy, and observe what happens to the people around you. Just be an observer. And it takes some skill to be able to do that. Again, it's that honesty thing. So that would be one of the first things that I would say, which sounds a bit, it doesn't sound particularly practical, maybe, I don't know, because it's so, maybe it seemed as removed, but listen to what comes out of your mouth, listen to the mood, listen to your heart palpitations, that type of observation, and spend a week, a day, whatever time you have. And then I would say, then write it all down. So that's the first thing. So observe it, write it down throughout the day. What's your mood? Or record it on a device. What's your mood? How does it make you feel? How does it impact you? What is it that you want to change about it? So those are the first types of questions that I would say to someone. And again, if someone doesn't really want to change, then it becomes harder, because I'm not into, you need to do something differently, you know. I've got my partner, we're very, very different people, and he gets quite stressed a lot. And I say to him, but what would you want to change? And he's like, well, there's nothing I can change. It's just it. And I'm okay. But I still will next week say the same thing to him. And, you know, over the years, I'm not saying I've changed him, but over the years, I've seen a lessening in the kind of the stressful impact.
So it's possible. It's possible.
It's definitely possible. Yeah.
All right.
The hardest folk.
And let's also talk about self-doubt. which I guess is connected to emotional intelligence. If somebody comes to you and says, look, I have some doubts in terms of my ability to do something or to achieve something, doubt about myself. Again, what would you say to that person? How can somebody remove a little bit that self-doubt? How can somebody be more confident? For example, I'm thinking about my own world.
Mm-hmm.
People come to me with self-doubt in terms of their ability to give great presentations, to speak in public, which is just one area. It can be much broader. But could you explore that from your perspective?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So at the heart of self-doubt is fear. It's that simple, in that once we recognize it's fear that's gripping us, then we understand what's kind of stopping us from doing things such as a great let's use a great presentation. So when you become attached to fear, I always say fear is just doing its job. Don't knock fear. And it's really essentially trying to protect you from either making a fool of yourself emotionally and physically, from falling or whatever. Fear is just trying to protect you. So it's just doing its job. So the first thing is around recognizing that it's fear that's making you doubt yourself, and then look at what is it that you're fearing and what's the likelihood of what you're fearing happening. If you had to put a percentage on it, how likely is that to happen? So that's a really great question. And then some people are quite scientific. They're, and then they go, and it really you can see the cogs going, and literally sometimes that can be the switch that really makes a difference. So next time you fear something, ask yourself, what's the likelihood of whatever you're worried about, or when you're doubting yourself, what's the likelihood of what you're worried about happening? And then once you start going through that process, you start to reduce that impact. We're always going to have a little bit of an element of self-doubt on us. When you have to go up on stage and speak to people, what if they don't like me? What if I bumble the words? What if I say the wrong thing? These are the things that are going through your head. But I say things like, nobody knows what you're supposed to say. You're the only one that knows. So, hey, as long as you know what you're there to present. And the other thing is, if you bumble, if you stumble over a few words, be a bit more lighter with yourself, a bit kinder to yourself as well. So there's some of the things, like what's the likelihood of something happening? Because, when we doubt ourselves, it's just that we think we're not good enough. And we'll probably talk about this a little bit later with confidence. We're thinking we're not good enough, or I'm not as good enough. I'm not as good as the last person that was on stage, and those types of things. That's what's going on in our head. So it's really important to recognize that, make friends with your fear. It's there to protect you. And fear makes us do things as well. It makes us push ourselves harder, not harder, but more, so you can be better.
Is that so? So fear makes us do something rather than making us avoid something. Is that how it works?
I should actually rephrase that.
Right.
For some people, fear can make you do things like you worry about something, and then but it highlights the importance that you want to do it. It makes it more obvious that you actually want to do something. It can actually stop people from doing things. It really can, or it can stop you enjoying things. But fear can be, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It can propel you into doing things that you don't think you're going to do. It's a bit of a strange one sometimes.
It's true. And now that you say this, it's something that I've experienced myself several times. And now I'm just thinking out loud, and you made me think that I've never considered that, but I think that I'm one of those people who, of course, I'm afraid of many things, but then I like to do it anyway.
Yeah.
For example, the first thing that comes to my mind, more than 10 years ago, as a student, I moved abroad. I moved to Ireland, and I went to study in Ireland, and I was so scared. I didn't speak English, And it was scary for me. And I remember the nights before, every night before moving, I was afraid, without speaking the language. But still, it's something that I did. I don't know why. Maybe you, as the expert, you know why I did it. But it's as if I had to prove something to myself. So I did it despite the fear. So yeah, what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
So that fear is a bit of a double-edged sword. It can work on, you can associate adrenaline with it as well, because you know, fear is also, Adele has terrible stage fright, but I think that's also linked to adrenaline, that you're going out and you want to do your best. So it can take the guise of different things, but yes, it can, as you just said, you went to another country, didn't speak the language, but you did it anyway, and you wanted to prove something to yourself. So sometimes, fear can work in our favor as well, that it actually propels us and pushes us to do things that we probably or otherwise might not do. So yeah, it's definitely, it is our friend, even sometimes it doesn't feel like it.
It can be a friend.
Can
I like
be
that.
A friend, yeah.
I like that. And you mentioned before, Rosemarie, confidence.
Yeah.
Which is the other side of things. So do you have any suggestions for boosting or developing or building confidence?
Yeah, definitely. So confidence is confidence is a mindset. It's literally, it's just what you have here between these sides of your head. And cliche, but whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are right. You've probably heard that. Yeah, it's so true, because how you go into any situation, it determines your outcome. So what I find most often with myself, the people I've worked with, or my friends and family, is the self-talk. So before you go into that situation, whatever you're afraid of, again, confidence is around fear. It's all around fear. You're worried that you're not going to say the right thing. You're not going to be able to do something. And then you have this kind of habitual pattern of self-talk. And you say, you say things like, I can't do that. I've never been able to, I'm not good enough. And you literally, that's what's going on in your mind. And I literally, if that's something that you listen to your self-talk, again, do the observation, and we'll just listen to yourself on a daily basis, and listen to all the, I call it, well, maybe the non-cheerleader type thing. What is it that you're saying? How can you turn that around? So for instance, if you say, I can't, I will try. Oh, no, there is no try with Yoda. I will, I've learned new things before. You say, I'm not good enough. I've learned new things before. And then you start going back and looking at your achievements where you thought, I wasn't able to do that, and then I did it. So use those things to bolster and boost your confidence and your mindset. There's some of the basics way, but self-talk is definitely a first step. Just watch what you say to yourself. Literally, if you were having a conversation with yourself, are you cheering yourself on? Are you encouraging? Are you being a good leader for yourself? What is that relationship that you have? Really explore that. And when you start saying, I can't do that, I don't know how to yet, I'm going to find a way. Turn that around, turn that language around. That's a really simple way. But there are obviously lots of other ways that's a good first step.
And that's interesting. So what are you suggesting then, that by changing the language that we use when we speak to ourselves, because of course we do, that can help us boost and build confidence?
Yeah, that's the very first step. It's whatever you're lacking confidence in, just listen to your language and then change it. That's the very first step, because your language starts here, and then it comes out of your mouth, and then it comes out in your behaviors, your actions. So if you're obviously telling yourself, I can't, that's what you're going to do. That's the road you're going to walk down. But if you say, I can figure this out, I can ask someone, I can get some help, and it's really simple. And I'm making it flippant, but it can be that simple as a starting point. It can be that simple, changing the language.
Interesting. And also, I wanted to ask you a question about women, because I know that you work a lot with women. So based on your on your experience working with, and of course you are a woman yourself. Yeah. So what are some of the specific challenges that the women face when it comes to everything we've discussed so far? So confidence, self-doubt, and we haven't talked about imposter syndrome, which is connected to what we talked about.
Yeah, they're all connected. So let's talk about your people are listening, the typical people that are listening. They're going to be wanting to do public speaking or present something, and they may have made a first step, or maybe they haven't got to that first step yet because of what's going on here. And for me, what I see a lot of women doing is the comparative behavior. So they're looking at what others, so they might watch a TED talk, and they see someone doing something amazing, a woman speaking on stage. I could never do that. Oh, so I'm just not even going to try. Those sorts of things. So comparing to impair is a really big thing that I see women doing. So this goes all alongside the self-doubt, the confidence. They're all intertwined. The imposter syndrome of I'm not good enough. Someone's better than me, that type of language. So they're all intertwined. So when we talk about how women are affected, so women are more likely to, we might experience the same thing as a man, but we're more likely to let it stop us from taking action. We're more likely not to do something because we don't feel confident or we feel like a fraud. But that's, we're all experiencing it. So one of the things I do say is speak to someone else who might be going through the same thing as you. And then compare for the right reasons rather than for the wrong reasons, and then do it together. That can be quite helpful as well. Because
why is it, Rosemary, that happens, that women tend to, from my perspective, without generalizing, again, I'm not an expert, that tend to do these comparisons, for example, as you mentioned, from a negative perspective, though, like which stops them sometimes from achieving what they want to achieve. What is it? Do you know?
I think it all stems from for the most part, the majority is the confidence, is the self-doubt. Generally, the feel the fear and do it anyway is a, and I'm careful how I say this, is generally a male trait. Generally, I say that because I'm a feel the fear and do it anyway. I'm a woman, so it doesn't really make sense. But we tend to hang back, or we wait until things are perfect, or better generally. And we process things also. We process things in our minds, and we'll talk to someone, or we won't talk, we'll have a conversation with someone who's feeling the same way, and then we perhaps don't get anywhere, rather than speaking to someone who would encourage us and help us to move along. But that's generally, so we and we like to have things in order quite often. We like to have things just so before we take that step, generally, again, not speaking for everyone.
Yeah, of course.
But so that can impact us, and unless we are encouraged to do something, or we have someone supporting or helping us, we might not take that first step. So that can be quite an interesting situation.
No, it is, and I see also in my own life, and for example, with my wife, like if I compare myself to her, what happens is that if I look at somebody who's achieved something incredible, then I'm super excited about it, because it means that it can be done, it can be achieved. Yeah, I can do it as well. Whereas her, or I've seen it with other women, and again, without generalizing, but I have seen that level of comparison that you mentioned, where, okay, that person has achieved something, they're doing something great, and that holds me back a little bit, because I will never be able to get to the same level. I will never be able to do the same thing. So yeah, absolutely. I see that in my own life as well.
Yeah. It is, it's unfortunate, but it happens. I mean, even like now in our social media culture, that happens a lot. I see women who are business owners, and they may have started their business at the same time as someone else, and the someone else is gone, maybe they've got, I don't know, 100 more followers or 1,000 more followers or whatever, and then they start comparing, and then and someone will say, I'm going to give up because I haven't got to that same point in time. And so you're comparing to impair, whereas we're on a completely different, each of us are on a completely different journey, and we've got to take the steps that we need, but don't give up, and find ways to encourage us and encourage ourselves and each other to present or whatever it is that you need to do.
Of course, yeah. And just yesterday, I watched a documentary on Netflix. I don't know whether you've seen it, The Social Dilemma, which is very interesting. It talks about, it may sound cliche now, but I highly recommend that documentary because it's very well done. The impact of social media on us, both in terms of privacy, but also in terms of our own psychology and our behaviors, and it's very much connected to what you've just described. So The Social Dilemma, for you and for our listeners, I recommend it. Just watched it yesterday.
Yeah, I saw it's trending on Twitter. I saw someone had said something about it earlier. I think I don't know how long it's been out.
Okay.
But I saw someone write something. I don't know if it's trending. Let me rephrase that. I saw someone write something about check out this documentary on Netflix. And that's quite interesting because about 5 years ago, I said to my partner, social media is going to really get out of hand, that people are going to lose their connection to reality and not start really struggling with that, the boundaries of how we live. And well, it probably was happening 5 years ago, but it's definitely happening now. So I will most definitely check out The Social Dilemma as well.
Yeah, and for the first time, of course, these are things that we've heard already several times when it comes to the impact of social media on, and sometimes also the negative impact of that on our lives. But for the first time, that really made me understand in detail what the problem is. And if we're not careful, it can be a big problem from many perspectives. So yeah, check it out.
No, it's good. It's it's about balance as well. The tool is there, social media is there, but it's how we use it that's important. And I think maintaining balance is key.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the last questions I wanted to ask you is, I know that you also talk about the importance of listening and asking the right questions, which to me is super important because, of course, I'm a public speaking coach. And so it's all about speaking. It's all about communicating. But actually, sometimes we don't think about listening as a very effective way to communicate ultimately your ideas. So could we explore that a little bit, the importance of listening and asking the right questions?
Yeah, definitely. Listening, critical in communication. But it often just falls that everyone thinks communication is about what comes out of our mouth and what we write, etc. But listening, and I think it's like a lost art to actually listen and tune in, because we're distracted. We've got so many things going on either in our head or to see around us. So obviously the impact of listening is essential. And what I see, a part of what I do, you say you're a coach as well, but part of what I have to do when I'm with my clients is to tune in to every single word they say and what they don't say, because there's so much in between the bits, the thinking time. I mean, that is a skill. I mean, that is, I wouldn't expect everybody to get to that level of skill. You can do, but it is something that I have to practice and get better at every single year, every day. But listening to someone, so rather than just listening to, I've got something to say, I'm so enthusiastic about responding to you, you actually have stopped listening because you're just thinking about what you want to say. But if you listen to every single word that person's saying and you give them your attention, relationships is key. But, when you're presenting or public speaking as well, you've got to listen to the room, look at the room, check in. What are they saying? What are they asking? Make sure you're listening. Don't make assumptions. We live our lives making assumptions rather than clarifying. When you're also speaking out, make sure you are exact with what comes out of your mouth. Don't leave room for ambiguity. And if there is, make sure that if someone asks you to clarify something, that you make sure you give them what you want. So it's about being understood and understanding is really essential for the listening element. So they're obviously really important to build great relationships as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yes, this is a very broad concept. When it comes to public speaking, a very practical thing that I often notice is that you give a presentation and then maybe there are some questions from the audience. And isn't that true? As soon as that happens, then often, especially if you're not an experienced presenter, then somebody asks you a question and you immediately start thinking about how to answer, what to answer. Whereas really the secret there is, and I agree with you, it takes time, it takes practice in really understanding and just being not like 1,000% focused on that particular question. The words they used, the words they didn't use, as you mentioned, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. So you're saying that when they're speaking, when they're asking the question, people are already they're not listening to the question anymore. They're thinking, what am I going to say? Right. Okay. Yeah. I've never thought about that before. That's really good. I do literally hang on to every word that someone says, but I'm going to now think about if I do that.
Yeah.
Good.
And Rosemarie, if we think about everything we've discussed, and we covered quite a few topics: emotional intelligence, confidence, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, women and their specific challenges, communication. Are there any books or people to follow, any resources, anything that comes to your mind that you think we should and our listeners should check out?
It's a good one. So I've, over the years, so many books, I start books, I put them down, I finish them with glee, and some things are harder to digest. But the book I mentioned was around emotional intelligence, is Why Emotional Intelligence Can Matter More Than IQ by Daniel Goleman. That's a good one if you want to get into reading about the kind of framework and the how-tos around emotional intelligence. It's quite a heavy book, heavy in weight and heavy in mind. I am very much about doing self-work first and then the practicalities. So or alongside the practicalities. So you can learn practical tools, but I do think that working on yourself is important. So another book that I found quite powerful for myself, might be again a bit heavy, but The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yes, I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah. So it's about being in the present moment, because in the present moment there's no worry, there's no fear, there's no anxiety. So that's really quite a powerful book. The other one is Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Classic. Absolutely recommend that. Wonderful. Brilliant. So those are the books that I recommend. And in terms of speakers, again, so many. Obviously there's loads of TED Talks, but Brene Brown, she's classic.
Sorry to cut you off now. I've just given one of her books to my wife just a few weeks ago. What's the title of that book? It's about imperfection. I don't know whether you remember the title. You need to learn to accept yourself, something along those lines.
So I haven't read any of Brene Brown's books, but I've listened to her speak. So I've got a list. I've got her on my list to read. But
she's amazing. She's amazing. Yeah.
So many books, so little time.
Yeah, true.
Literally got a list of people that I want to check out their books and get to. So yeah, so wonderful that you recommend her as well. You've recommended her to your wife. Yeah, so you can start off with the TED Talks or follow her on the various social media platforms, but and then get her books as well. And the other one is,
and sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. Did you have anybody else in your mind?
Les Brown, great communicator as well, wonderful communicator. And a personal favorite of mine in terms of doing internal work is Wayne Dyer. Change your thoughts, change your life. Start with the inner work first, and then do the alongside the practicalities of building your confidence and taking action. So they're kind of my I had to summarize because otherwise the list would be like, phew.
No, thank you for that. Thank you very much for that. And actually, now I was thinking about it. I have one more question for
Oh,
you,
yeah.
which is a personal question. Feel free not to answer if you don't want to.
Okay.
Sometimes when I think about the ideas that you've shared, I might be totally wrong, but I start thinking about when you talk about work on yourself, for example, it starts with the inside. I link it to meditation and their world.
Mm-hmm.
So just out of curiosity, do you meditate? Is that something that you do?
I do.
You do.
So I'm very spiritual in terms of, well, I'm not very spiritual actually. I take that back. I am trying to be very spiritual. I started my own journey of self-development, etc. So I'm very practical. I'm very, my company is called Pragmatica. I'm very logical. I'm very practical. I know what to do. I'm a troubleshooter. That's wonderful. But for me, I wanted a sense of calm as well. So alongside all these wonderful other things that I've been learning and developing for myself and for the people I work with. So emotional intelligence is essential. But with that, it put me into that world of meditation. So taking that 5, 10, 20 minutes a day to just be in that space, whatever meditation looks like for you, but just finding that quiet time to think. The best ideas come to me when I'm quiet and still. And I'm not talking about Zen on a cushion, it doesn't have to look like that. It just means it started with a self-care routine of just taking some calm, just to get things straight in my head and making notes. That's where it started from. And I was like, oh, I quite like this moment of before the madness starts throughout the day. So I that's something I've practiced and I continue, and that really helps me, keeps me energized. It keeps me grounded. It keeps me unstressed, de-stressed mostly, not all the time. I'm not perfect, but yeah. So that's a practice in my life. Definitely.
I thought so. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
That's fine. Fine.
And before we close, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us? Is there a topic or a question that you would have liked me to ask you, but I haven't done it? Anything else you'd like to share?
No, I want to leave maybe a tip or an idea with your audience, is that if you are presenting or you're public speaking, take your ego out of it and think about what you're saying to the audience. So if you're fearful, worried, don't feel confident, think about all the things you know and how you're going to impart that to the people that are listening. So take your mind off yourself, and if I'm going to get the words wrong, and that's all about your ego. Just present yourself to the audience and share your knowledge with them. And think about the value you're giving to them and how you can help them and change their lives if that's what you're doing. So that's what I'd like to do.
Amazing. And I think that's a great way to end our conversation. Rosemarie, thank you so much. I've personally learned a lot, and I'm sure it's been very useful for our listeners as well. You said you're in London, I'm in London, so it would be great if when all this madness is over, we can, you never know, just catch up. And thank you again, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. It's wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. All the best.
All the best.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.